Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Welcome to our 2025 Snack and Learn webinar series. We will be talking today about efficient airport redevelopment strategies for seamless progress. We will have the presentation, and at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So you can drop your questions in the chat box during the presentation. At the end, our expert will address them. Also, you can find this presentation in the handouts box. It's available for you to download it. And with that said, I will pass in our expert, Brendan Smith.
Thank you very much. So welcome all. Thank you for attending today. I'm looking forward to sharing about how to make airport redevelopment strategies more seamless. For those, my name is Brendan Smith. I'm a lead civil aviation engineer working with WSP in the New York office. I have about 18 years of experience, and I've actually been involved in airport aviation work for the past 8 years on major airport redevelopment projects within the New York metro area. And that's kind of where all my experiences come from, and I'll be passing and showing through this presentation. Just really quick, it's hard to frame everything and talk about all the complicated things when it comes to airport redevelopment projects. But what I'm really looking to do here and touch on is kind of showing different strategies to sort of show and maybe help you in your airport redevelopment project to kind of form a framework around how to develop and make construction changes without too much of an impact to the community and whoever's coming through the airport. Why do we need to upgrade airports? Airports are aging here. There's been several projects throughout the country where upgrades have been occurring, but there's still a significant amount of airports that require upgrading. A lot of airports are old. There's a lot of deterioration through these airports, and they estimate over $150 billion of infrastructure needs are needed to redevelop or upgrade those airports. But as we get into airport redevelopment, how to develop that framework, I typically like to use this as an example. For a plane, to build a plane or to build a framework around a plane, there's several components involved. For example, for the Boeing 787, what Boeing did was they went out, developed each part of the plane with different companies, different engineers, and there were several different teams working independently of each other when developing this airplane. But there was a core center of overseeing everything, ensuring that it all comes together smoothly. And I also like to use this as an example. The Blackbird, which is one of my favorite military jets, can get the speeds of over 2,000 miles an hour, which was developed by the Skunk Works, which was a Lockheed company or a small little team within that company. And their legacy was the idea that small empowered teams could achieve the impossible. And I like to sort of use that same perspective for developing an airport framework when it comes to airport redevelopment, because there's several teams involved in an airport, from IT to different technology to landside operations, terminal operations. They all work independent of each other, but they all end up complementing each other as well. So when it comes to redeveloping an airport, having that small team that understands each component of the airport helps to make things a little bit more seamless, a little bit easier when redeveloping, especially redeveloping in a major airport type of construction. But it really starts with the scope. The project scope typically gets defined prior to construction or any of this. It typically gets defined at a different level. I'm not going to dive too much into how that project scope was developed, but I want to kind of hone in on, once that project scope is defined, how do you communicate that to the team? How do you engage stakeholders to minimize disruptions when you have to do some major undertakings within the airport? So starting with the stakeholders, this is just an overall list of stakeholders in an airport. It probably doesn't cover everything, but what I'm here to really show you is there are several parties, several stakeholders involved in an airport. You have from the operator who manages the airport, air traffic controllers, the FAA, CBP, TSAs, all these parties help operate and maintain the airport. But when you come in and you have now a developer that comes into play to they're the investors. They're looking to invest in the airport and make more revenue for the airport and for themselves. And as you get into construction, now you have contractors from engineers, architects, all looking to redevelop the airport, the terminal. And then the last thing, which is the most important out of all of these, not saying that they're not all important, but is the other stakeholders involved as well, from the airlines and the concessions. So these other stakeholders bring in the revenue so that we can have the budgets to be able to upgrade all these airports. But everybody even though they all work sort of independent of each other, they all work together so we can get these state-of-the-art facilities for passengers to enjoy themselves as they fly off to their next destination. Airport redevelopment puts a lot of strain on the operations, and this is something that needs to be discussed, communicated with, also just with the stakeholders. Understanding what their operational strains will be during this work. So for example, when it comes to landside operational disruptions, traffic congestion may not seem like it would impact the airport or the terminal or the airlines too much, but what ends up happening is maybe passengers or customers can't get to the airport in time to catch their flights, or the crew or the pilots are not able to make it to the airport in time, so it could end up delaying flights. And so what I'm trying to sort of show here is there needs to be an understanding of, once you define that scope, understanding what it can disrupt is really important, so you can communicate that to the stakeholders to ensure that maybe things need to be communicated a little bit sooner, or people need to get to the airport a little bit sooner so they don't miss their flights. There's also growth limitations when it comes to airport redevelopment. Typically, when you're upgrading an airport, is to meet that growth, but during that time, some of this can take years to develop, and it could limit growth. But so those things need to sort of be looked at during construction, ensuring that we don't impact growth for those stakeholders who are bringing in the revenue into the airport. So how do you build that framework around it to ensure that the project runs smoothly without interruption? It's starting with that project scope, as we mentioned a few slides earlier. It's understanding the scope and then building a foundation to make decision making a little bit easier, a little bit more objective, to ensure that we don't impact our stakeholders. And then once you understand that, it's bringing in those stakeholders who are at the airport every single day. It's setting up that plan with them, reviewing through what those impacts will be, and then once you set that up, you're able to sort of pivot to make changes earlier. So if you end up doing this like a week or we're not giving them enough time, it could really cause an issue and have a really large impact. And then once the stakeholders are involved, they have an understanding of what the impacts are going to be. You really want to make sure that the safety and security aspects are taken into consideration. You're working in restricted areas. Also, safety is paramount here, as especially working on the ramp. There's very expensive equipment out on that ramp that you don't want to damage. And once all this is put together, then you come up with a sort of a plan or a framework to be able to monitor and adapt throughout the entire process. And I'll get into the different tools and stuff in a little bit that kind of helps put that framework together. So each stakeholder has a different position or a different job, and I like to sort of call this the scope of consensus with your stakeholders. And this sort of refers to the range or extent of agreement among your stakeholders. In context of airport redevelopment, it would encompass a mutual agreement on various aspects of the project. So when you have no consensus, there's significant disagreement with your parties. But as you get to the higher consensus or broad consensus, your stakeholders agree, and there's fewer issues that you have to address. Typically on the community side, the community, even though they're not involved in everyday airport operation, when you start to develop around an airport at a very large scale, it can really impact your community. So having their understanding of what the impacts are going to be at a reasonable time would help with the airport redevelopment process. And then as you get to your contractors and your operators just looking to meet schedule, get the work in, and they want to get in and out. So they typically have a higher consensus with all the other stakeholders. And obviously your airlines should also be involved throughout this entire process, because anything impacting their operation could have a huge impact, could have a huge domino effect on their customers, on their passengers, especially with trying to get aircraft in and out of the airport. Once you engage your stakeholders, it's time to really properly set up your teams. The initial implementation is really having your key individuals set up prior to all this, setting up your teams who can help identify the critical tasks, and you really set that groundwork before you start really involving your stakeholders. Once you involve those stakeholders, now you could really set up that team formation, try to find different individuals, part of those different stakeholders that you coordinate with, to sort of keep the communication together. And this will help ensure clear communication through all the different channels. Once you set that all up, then you can start to plan for each phase of work. Sometimes during design, when you're through the design process, these are sort of the things that you want to think through. But as you get to construction, there's always different barriers that you have to hurdle. So planning for each phase of work and setting those milestones and communicating that to the team is extremely important. And as work goes on, you want to continuously have that oversight, have someone within the team have that continuous oversight to ensure that they're adhering to plans and things are to schedule. And you're communicating that to everyone that's involved in the airport who is operating this every day, who's not so much involved with the construction process as time goes on. I just want to give this an example of how if you don't set these things up properly prior, you can have overlooked scope. The communication becomes inconsistent. Someone's telling us, maybe the architect is telling the contractor something different than what the owner would know. So you generally want to set up that communication. This is just a kind of a high level example of helping control document flows, helping control the communication through the teams, and this helps improve what the scope should be involved and how you should be able to communicate this with each of the stakeholders. And then once you set this all up properly, going through those steps, it helps manage stakeholders' impacts and needs. It helps you manage your schedule, and then it also helps manage impact on airport operation and passengers. And when this is all coordinated together, you can manage those disruptions much easier, much more efficient. There's as I kind of wrap this up and look at the different tools, I'm gonna show you some examples of what we've done on different projects. But there's different tools to help coordinate a lot of this, to help minimize disruptions, from understanding the culture of who works at the airport, from your community to your airport to your airlines. The employees and employee engagement is very important, so they able to understand what the impacts are going to be. There's different management tools out there. It's really what fits best what fits best for you. I like to have regular meetings with different stakeholders. Sometimes I'll bring them all in, sometimes I'll keep them separated depending on the type of work that's being done. I like having continuous check-ins with different stakeholders to ensure that the impacts are not large. If they are, then we can pivot. And then there's also different project tools that are out there. And I'm gonna kind of show you a few examples of how to use those project tools. Some of my favorite, I typically use different design softwares. I like using PDF editors, and I like actually using AI chat, which actually can help provide great feedback. Because it kind of gives you some great ideas that you wouldn't even think of. So kind of showing the different types of tools that we use to sort of communicate that to the teams. This is an example of us building a new ramp inside an existing terminal. When you show this drawing on the lower left, for people who are not familiar with design drawings or with different types of plans, it's hard to understand exactly what this is showing. So, I mean, they're typically familiar with what the floor plan looks like. So what we did on the lower right here is take a photo of the existing terminal and then use art tools to display what areas are going to be impacted and how we're going to change all this and how this is all going to change. So we went through different scenarios of moving seats around and help changing on the line. That's kind of what the image on the upper left here shows us. How do we get customers in and out when they board and deboard? And then this just kind of shows what it ended up kind of looking like, where we put up the temporary wall and things were with this line of communication showing what the impacts are. We're able to work it out, coordinate with the entire team to make sure that the customers and the passengers are able to work around and get around all this temporary work that's happening at that time. Another thing I like to use is just AI chat. I'm not going to get into too much of this, but when you use AI in a certain context, you can really leverage it to your benefit. So if you clearly state what your goals are, how you're going to, what the impacts are going to be, you can ask AI to sort of be, hey, can you be that AI operator for me and outline any considerations for setting up a temporary wall? And the outputs will give you great output, great considerations to consider. So it's just a tool to use for your advantage. But it's important to understand what the outputs are and make sure you read it and make sure that you leverage that concept to provide to, so you don't want to just copy and paste it. Just another PDF overlay type of example that we're showing here, where there's so much construction happens outside of the terminal. A lot of people who work there every day may not know exactly what is happening. So just sort of color codings, being able to color code specific roads are to come in the future, kind of shows, hey, yeah, this is what it's going to look like when this is completed. So we may have some minor disruptions at this time, but in the long term, it's going to really benefit us, the airport, and benefit the community. And then my last example is my last example I wanted to use was a major construction activity that we had to do to open up a terminal. So just picture this. One is, this is would just be a drawing. I'm going to show two. I'm going to kind of explain two different ways. So picture me explaining I'm going to explain this in a way where you'll look at a drawing, and I'll go through the process and just picture, does this make any sense? And then I'm going to show a second example of, we actually put renderings together for this to sort of really explain it much better. And you could, and just think to yourself, which way was better, and how this was in a way of communicating to the team. So in this scenario, you're looking at a plan view of our new frontage roadway that was supposed to go and play. There was an impact where our second level, or our arrivals frontage roadway. So the frontage roadway was made up of 3 levels. The bottom level was HOV. Second level was the arrivals level, and then the departures level was your third level was the departures level. We had a conflict with the second level through design process, through traffic iterations, traffic modeling. Closing the second level to build this out when we opened up this new terminal just wasn't possible. So what we ended up doing was we figured out a way to launch a temporary bridge structure, which was highlighted in green here, to be able to span over a new bridge structure that was going to be built. So if I explained it like that, it'd be really difficult to understand, like, oh, how would you do that? So what we ended up doing is we sort of dove into this a little bit more. We started putting renderings together to sort of help explain it, to help put a story to it, to show this is how we were going to build this out. So like I said, there was 3 different levels. You had the HOV, arrivals, and departures level. And the conflict was at where you could see the red line in this rendering, and we need to span over this. So we end up showing sort of an aerial view of, this is where the impacts are. And we started putting renderings together just to show the existing roadway that needed to be maintained during this, because that roadway was connecting to an existing terminal that had to be operational during construction. And we started put staging plans together to show how we build around this. And this was communicated with all the stakeholders involved, so they understood the impacts that we could end up running into. So we end up building around it, and then on the side here, as you can see, we assembled a temporary bridge structure that would be launched. Now, if I just showed this in a plan, would you have understood what we were trying to do? And then as the areas continually got built out, in over a weekend, we're able to demo out the existing structure, launch a temporary bridge to be able to span that gap. So within just a day or two, we're able to open back up that arrivals level for the new head house. And we had to communicate that to all the stakeholders involved, that we'll have a disruption as we change over from the existing terminal to the new terminal. But this is what it's going to end up. This is what it would look like once a terminal opens. But we still have questions of, how are you going to build this out when you have a temporary bridge there? So we even dove into making even more details, more 3D renderings to mimic how that actually was going to be built out, so it didn't impact the roadway at the second level. So what we showed here is the construction process now of how that beam, or how the bridge would be built out underneath. So the beams, this kind of shows that beam would be delivered on the departures level. So again, that'd be showing the stakeholders what the impacts would be when we did that. And then one at a time, we would pick that beam, set it on a movable system that would slide those beams in place. And then one at a time, we would be able to set those beams, and then we're able to now, once those beams are set, we're able to construct out each span one at a time and switch traffic to the new structure to be able to shift traffic around this as we maintain the arrivals level. And then this is just an example of what it looks like in the field. We were able to sort of set those beams under the temporary bridge structure while maintaining traffic. And through this coordination and this showing these images really helped everyone involved at the airport understand what the impacts would be. And it took a few months of coordination and planning and meetings, but at the end, everybody was comfortable with it. And we were able to successfully build this out while maintaining that level at the same time. So just to wrap this up, with some key takeaways here is is making sure you have that early implementation, the owner understanding, stakeholder understanding, coordinate with the teams properly. Then once you have that all set up, that framework set up, is plan for each phase of work. And then as you go, you continuously have that oversight, ensuring that the project continues and it doesn't impact operations at the airport. With that, I want to just thank you everybody for being able to join here. I really appreciate you attending today, and I'm going to open up to a few questions here. So first question I see that came in is how has the consideration of passenger experience evolved over time in airport construction? That's a great question. Recently on one of the terminals that we just did, we actually just changed out the signage. And sometimes when you evolve passengers within the process, kind of explain to them what's happening, they typically get pretty excited about airport redevelopment. But one thing that we found pretty successful actually was involving airlines, and airlines can communicate that to their passengers. So when they're 24, 48 hours in advance, they typically get notifications. So when you work with the airlines, you could provide that communication to people who are going to be attending the airport, or arriving at the airport, and they can plan for those impacts. There's another question here as well. Looks very similar. Was what public involvement strategies have proven effective for communicating temporary inconveniences due to airport redevelopment? So yeah, like I said, was when you involve the airlines and you involve the stakeholders in the projects and they understand what that scope is, they're your first step in communicating that to your passengers or people arriving at the airport, so they understand those impacts, and that helps you mitigate those issues of people arriving late to the airport, so you don't want them to miss their flights. Another question came in. Which group has the lead in development of these mitigation efforts or serves as the team leaders? That's a great question. So it really depends of how you set the teams up prior. So for a design, when you look at some of these larger projects, there's so many people involved. So setting up having really the lead, the design build lead, or the owner, you want to have a design build lead who is able to sort of oversee this different aspects of the project. And then from the owner's side, you want to we recommend having somebody at that PM status to be able to you want to have someone at that owner side to be able to communicate that with everybody at the airport who is operating. But it really depends. I mean, projects are so complicated and so complex. It really depends on the airport itself. With that, I just want to say thank you everybody for attending today. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to discuss and talk aviation. But thank you all for attending, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.